Welcome back, everyone, to Innovation Obsessed, the podcast where we explore the cutting edge of technology, processes, and thinking that are shaping a safer and more secure world. Today, we have a truly exceptional guest who truly embodies the very spirit of innovation and discovery that fuels our conversations here on Innovation Obsessed. There's a quote that I love, and it's that discovery is seeing what everyone has seen and thinking what no one has thought. And our guest today has lived this principle throughout his remarkable career. So think about it. From gracing the cover of USA Today as a 13-year-old tech prodigy to serving as a Special Forces FBI agent and now as the visionary founder of Force Metrics, Andre McGregor has consistently looked at complex challenges in public safety and security through a unique lens. Andre, it's an absolute honor to have you here today, and welcome to the Innovation Obsessed podcast. Let's get started. Tell us more about yourself, and even more specifically, you have an incredible background, and I'd love to learn more about what drew you to this intersection between, technology and public safety.
It's definitely been a passion that has grown over time. I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado, really got into technology, wanting to be a wildlife biologist, but somehow ended up at Brown University, studying computer science, and my first job on Wall Street at Goldman Sachs, and really enjoyed working in technology. And then I got a phone call from an FBI recruiter asking me to take a test to be a special agent. And not many people get a phone call like that. So I decided to go explore. I took a test and then another test, and then ended up in an interview panel, and then ended up doing a physical fitness test, which I failed miserably because I'm a computer engineer with soft hands, and also had an A-type personality. So decided to retake it, and polygraph, and all of a sudden ended up at the FBI Academy in Quantico, and really they taught me to arrest people, take a punch, shoot a gun, the law, and they put me in Manhattan, and that's really where I got to understand not only public safety, but also how the government is involved in investigations in general.
Yeah, that's amazing. Looking at your trajectory, it sounds like, technology has always just been there for you. And then bringing that together with your experience at the FBI and seeing, technology in action. I'm sure you came across a lot of technologies. And, I think about, I watched one of your Forbes interviews, and I can only imagine the stories you might be able to tell about the misconceptions around the types of technology that law enforcement and security forces have, right? And I think the perception is, we watch a lot of TV. We watch maybe too much TV or too many videos online. So we have this perception that you walk into a police station and basically they're equipped with all the technology, right? These new age, futuristic capabilities that can, know what you're going to do before you do it. And the reality is that most police forces are really suffering when it comes to technology, and specifically, I think, to technology around being proactive in policing. And I love so much about what you're talking about and what you're doing at Force Metrics, because there's a lot of discussion around prevention, right? And how do we know more so that we can create a safer world? And I think there's a lot there that, we could all learn from that. The other piece that is intriguing to me is the people who are there to service, whether they're security personnel or public safety personnel, there's a tremendous burden on them, right? There's a burden on them to get it right. They're under pressure. They're in a moment that could be, a life-changing moment for them or for someone else. And that burden often goes missed, I think, when people don't really think about what that moment might be like. So I'd like to know from your perspective, what are some of those key indicators or models for security and law enforcement that suggest that we're still kind of weighted a little heavily on the reactive side versus the preventative side? And would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So when I joined the FBI, I had the same preconceived notions that anyone has watching television, that it was the top of the line technology. And we had a mainframe that we would put our information in. And this was, we didn't get rid of that mainframe system until 2013.
Wow.
And even then it was a $200 million ordeal that actually failed. And then they had to just start new and say, we're just going to use this new technology. The reason I bring that up is oftentimes the FBI is called sort of America's super cops, or a cop's cop, where the cops go to get, assistance. And if the FBI has technology limitations that way, then imagine sort of what other departments go through. So when you compare television to law enforcement in reality, the burden is very strong because again, with television, we've said, okay, crime will be solved in a day, 2 days, even though the show might be an hour. There's an expectation that all this information is readily available to the person that took the initial call. That initial person is doing triage and just determining other resources and if they're available. And that can be days, weeks, months, or never, depending on that location. And then when you look at all the technologies out there, we're getting better with, computer vision and video, and we're getting better with, capabilities of data sharing, and AI is a huge component of this. But oftentimes you're still having that one-to-one human contact that requires having a conversation with someone. That conversation could be 5 minutes, it could be 2 hours. While in that time, something else could be happening, and then you have to be redirected and come back. And so you have a lot of those things that are still factors that goes to the issue of victimization, and sort of how are we not only dealing with criminalization, which is, hey, we want to go find the bad person that did a bad act and have justice applied. But there's also a victim on the other end that's saying, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing for me? This is taking a long time. Did you forget about me? And so when we came in, myself and my CTO at Force Metrics, Jason, we were the first cyber agents in the FBI in the cohort. So there's about 50 technically trained agents of 13,000 agents worldwide when we started the first National Security Cyber Squad. And when you think about that, and you think about hacking, you think about, a variety of other, technology crimes, you have to do forensic analysis. That takes a lot of time. And you're also balancing it with the large banks and the violent issues. And there's only 50. So now you start to take that same ideology and apply it to a local police department where they may have one or two, or a regional center. So the misconception is really that there's a lot of resources that are available. And right now, staffing is always the biggest concern. But then the technology hurdle, because oftentimes, police departments deserve, I like to say, DARPA innovation and Apple simplicity, but we give them the budget of an iPhone. And so how are we taking that technology and that simplicity and fitting it in that budget, because the citizens deserve that. The person at violent crime, their car was stolen, the missing autistic kid that everyone is looking for. And so when you start to take those pieces in together, you now see that there's a network of technologies, whether it's the license plate readers, whether it's the Ring cameras on the doors, whether it's the 911 call data, and you start to bring that together and you actually can get a pretty decent picture. And you're also doing that while thinking about privacy, transparency, and of course, just managing the data of a very vulnerable community. Because anyone calling 911, with the exception of someone actively giving birth, is usually the worst day of their life. And so now, they want the information protected too.
No, those are such really incredible points. I think, from our perspective and at Oosto, we talk so much about prevention and being proactive. And, when I learned more about Force Metrics and what you all are doing, there's such an intersection in terms of those ideas around what information that you can have in your decisioning that can help you to, I love there was a comment that you made in one of your interviews where you talked about the person who might just be having a bad day. And so, being able to know that person is present, maybe they made a threat or, maybe they're in distress, but to have more information so that you can intercept, so that you can have a conversation. I think we talk a lot about reactive, and it's really important. And you probably can, I'd love to learn more about, from you about what that means. But I think as well, we need to have more conversations about what is possible and for prevention. And I think a lot of the perception is it's just lacking, right? There more conversations need to happen around that idea of what can we know to help us in the moment so that we can potentially prevent an incident. And what you said about meeting someone on their worst day. I mean, that again, going back to that idea of that's a burden, right? To be able to say, hey, I'm coming to this person in this moment. What can I bring to this to make this encounter or to de-escalate it?
I think when people think about proactive in policing, oftentimes they're thinking Minority Report or movies where we're going to identify someone that's bad before the bad happens, which is always great. We don't want violence or shootings, things like that, but we're going to do it well before the initial thought happened. And so when people think in that perspective, they often then the next thought is social media and, okay, you said something here and you're in my brain and you didn't really get context about what's saying. And really, when you're, you kind of learn this as an FBI agent and other law enforcement that, free speech is very important. But there's obviously a line, sort of yelling fire in a crowded movie theater. When you're thinking about a threat, oftentimes we have to say, are you saying that you're going to, kill, harm someone on a specific day with a specific, weapon, right? So, if I just say, hey, I'm going to, kill or harm my neighbor, it doesn't really say much about action, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it. And those are the key pieces to sort of put together when you start to determine, well, is it just someone talking or is it someone that has an action plan, right? And the same action plan can be about, wanting to commit suicide, the same action plan. There's a lot of things that you kind of look at. And so when we look at data, we're trying to figure out like all of those pieces and do it in, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, maybe a minute if you're lucky, right? And so, as we look at how we can respond, we have to look at situations where, I'll give you an example, domestic violence. There's two issues that I care a lot about, domestic violence and juvenile issues, because when we look at the data, we can see the domestics that are escalating to the death well before the death. Why? Because it started with noise complaint from the neighbor with barking dog. That really wasn't a barking dog, but the neighbor wanted to say something but didn't want to get in trouble. And so they wanted to just get out the door. And then it turned into more arguments. But then there was debit card fraud because the partner decided to spend money in a way that they shouldn't have. That then led to a window being broken in the door. And then it led to a strangulation or a gun being involved. But there were many pieces before that. Most crimes don't usually go from zero to shooting people. There are many, many little steps to sort of get there. And that's obviously the position of looking at the data, protecting the data, understanding what the data means. But, if you take there's very few cases where you kind of have a mass shooting with very little sort of knowledge before, right? And the one that kind of sticks in everyone's brain is the MGM shooting in Las Vegas. That particular gentleman actually had nothing before. That's rare. It's absolutely rare. So when you look at sort of like Salvador Ramos and Uvalde, as awful as it is, he, slashing tires, killing cats. There's a lot of things that sort of led to a place where, no one's expecting that he's going to, shoot up a school, but there was something in the books. And so I say all that because the second part of that equation is juvenile issues, because oftentimes things are happening in the home and domestic, things like that. Kids are seeing things. And so I remember very palpably that I was talking to a supervisor of the ATF Raven task force. So they do sort of anti-violence in major cities. And he was telling me, it's just an older sort of, we call him SWAT beard gentleman that, has been around for a while. And he says, hey, when I look at a juvenile that's, shooting a gun, in a bus or something like that, a couple of things come to mind. One is, our community's failed that kid, regardless of what we think about the family life or the structure, that kid got to a stage that's happening. And number two, which I thought was very interesting, was he's like, when you see him shooting, he's shooting very calmly. And if anyone's ever shot a gun, like the first time you ever shoot it, it's an explosion in your hand. I'm a firearms instructor. I teach a lot of people to shoot safely. It's usually not a pleasant experience because it's a loud explosion in your hand. And you learn over time to control the weapon system. And so if that kid is shooting calmly at a person in a bus, that means they've shot before and before and before, which means now is the time that we, A, caught them, and B, they're probably spilling blood. And so what did we do between the time when they picked up the gun the first time to the time when this happened? And so that's where we start to talk about proactive policing, right? And that's what we do at Force Metrics. So we created an AI-powered precision policing platform to look for this. And again, you're looking for the indicators of behavior that allows for intervention before blood is shed and before a domestic violence victim is found dead. And I say this because this is happening every day in every city all the time.
Such compelling stories. And, as a mother, as a person, it's hard to hear those stories, right? And we hear a lot of those as well. And we talk a lot about what is that point? Where can we go? How much farther out do we need to go on the perimeter, right? To meet that person, if we know that a threat has been made, and creating some awareness around, I think there's so much news, right? When something happens, but I think there's a failure of conversations around prevention. No one's talking about the incident that didn't happen.
And I also think that people don't have enough information to feel like they can have a good conversation. And that's okay. I like Ray Dalio, Bridgewater Associates principles that he writes. And one of his principles is earn the right to have an opinion, meaning that I don't have an opinion on, how trains should move in the country. That's not my skill set. I can talk about cybersecurity. I can talk about law enforcement. I can talk about public safety. I can talk about, technology, but, earn a right to have an opinion. And so, oftentimes, people just don't have the audiences that are willing to allow oftentimes for either a safe space or a brave space to be able to start having those conversations. Because when you look at the data, and again, I get the awesome responsibility of servicing and protecting the data of dozens and dozens of law enforcement agencies everywhere from California to Texas to Virginia and all points in between. And I get to see the 911 calls. I get to see the, police reports, the jail incidents. When you start to look at that data, you put those pieces together, you realize there's actually ways to identify those issues before it gets to a critical point. Again, you're allowed to have a bad day. We pay taxes. That taxes goes to a law enforcement agency. And actually, in most jurisdictions, 40 to 70% of your dollars goes to public safety. Of your taxpayer dollars goes to public safety. So you deserve that if you have a bad day. But we shouldn't wait until it gets to a really bad moment where we said, we could have done something and we didn't. And that's where the data part comes in. Again, you're using your words to kind of, get to the perimeter. We can do that safely. And I think we do that when we start to democratize the data, right? Again, your taxpayer dollars. So it's technically your data. How do we, the piece of information I like to say, everyone sort of asks me, especially, as I'm growing this company, where do you see it in 10 years? And I'm like, I don't know where society is going to be in 10 years. I don't know if we're all going to be wearing, VR goggles and that. But I'm a data guy. I'm a data company. What I can say is right now, today, I can look on my phone. You can look on your phone to see what the weather is in your location. You can look at my weather in my location. Right now, we both don't know if we're safe where we are right now. Even where we live, we may know our block is safe, but we definitely don't know what's happening 5-10 blocks up or down. And we can make some assumptions. There's no graffiti, or I don't see, indicators of crime or a variety of stuff, but that's still assumptions. The police department does. Why? Because we, as a police department, collect information, because in an emergency, you're still going to call 911. It's the most widely recognized number over any other country's emergency number is still our 911. And the police collect that data. So how do we start to say, well, what does safety look like so that when I am in a new city, I can start to say, well, okay, am I safe? Am I not safe? Or, can I understand what's happening in and around that location so I can make better decisions? And I think that's where we take this data, is we're really trying to democratize it.
I love that. We talk a lot about the idea of, the cost of being wrong. So we work a lot in the commercial space, and, it can be the obvious, right? It can be someone's life is impacted, an incident occurs, vandalism, theft, etc. But the cost of being wrong also means that, your taxes may go up. It means that maybe people don't want more to come to your businesses, right? Because they're not safe. It means that you might be paying more for insurance. I mean, there are tangible costs of being wrong. And being able to have that posture of prevention, I think, is something that we should assume as our right versus saying, hey, you know what, we're just going to wait until something happens and be victims of this. I think it's a conversation we can and should have. I recently had a conversation with my daughter and one of her friends. She's 18 years old, in high school, and she was lamenting the fact that the school had, bought a bunch of TV cameras, but she didn't feel safe in the school. And that's great that we have this, but I want to feel safe. And that's just a basic need that we all have, right? We want to feel safe. And I love what you said, because I think it's not only let's talk about the incidents that didn't happen, but let's find new ways to measure the value, right? Let's talk about the value to communities, like you said, to be able to walk into a city and know that this place is safe, to know that it's being protected in ways that are innovative and that are smart, and to feel that level of security. And, I have a friend who's a former FBI agent, and, I know that he always sits in a certain place. There's that posture that you all take of awareness and, your head on a swivel. But at the same time, it is our right. We do pay taxes. We do deserve that right to feel safe and to ask more of our law enforcement, of, the businesses that we go to. There is an imperative to protect us. And I love what you all are doing, because you're having that conversation, right? And you're helping to think of, let's think about it differently. Let's measure success in new ways, and let's create value around the conversations around what didn't happen versus focusing on the inevitability of what will happen.
And also, it's our social contract with each other. If we're talking about Rousseau for a bit, we all sign this together implicitly that we're going to ideally follow the rules and the laws. Otherwise, people are running stop signs and stop lights. And, but we also want to and need to help each other. And I think that goes into saying that the police, as it stands today, will always be reactive, unless the community also opts in to provide proactive support. So even as much as we have technologies like ShotSpotter that listens for gunshot detection, that's still reactive. I'd much rather a community member tell me about the kids that may have found a gun and is hiding it and can identify well before the bullet is fired and the technology system is activated, right? So oftentimes we call these proactive technologies, but they're just faster reactive technology.
Yeah,
right?
That's a really good point.
And so as I look at what we can do, again, it goes back to innovation, not only with the internet, but also AI. And that means we're able to do more with less. We're able to do more, with our phones. We're able to provide data in a way that people can understand. With force metrics and what we do, it's sort of, anyone can, vomit data on someone and just get like, who's going to read it? When do you have time to read it? Like, well, while you're driving, when you have a break, you have no break. Like, so how are you telling the story, right? And at the end of the day, the best technology is about UI, UX, that experience. Easy to use, doesn't require a complex degree. And don't get me wrong, there's technologies that do require that, and that's a different conversation. But what we're talking about is if you make technology easy for everyone, then all of a sudden everyone becomes that sensor. That, okay, well, in government, we've tried so many things, for decades, see something, say something. But like, well, should I say something, or does someone else say something, or someone else will do it? Because this isn't to that level. We haven't provided the abilities for people to easily participate. And I think now we're getting to that stage with a lot of AI technologies.
Yeah, I love that. And that's a really great conversation to have, right? About our responsibilities, but then enabling that, right? And finding a way to make it, as we talk a lot about the word actionable in technology, but that's truly what you're doing, right? And taking that and making that actionable. And, that's a lot of what we talk about as well is, when we think about security guards, right? You have a security guard who is tasked with, hey, I saw a picture of someone. And I saw another picture, I have this list of people that I need to identify, right? And they're in a busy environment, maybe in a hospital. People are coming and going. There's a lot. And we're just asking people to do the impossible, right? And so when technology can enable and provide an alert that says, hey, you know what? This person that you're looking for just walked in the door when you turned your head or were distracted or they're disguised. I mean, those are the kinds of things that we can do, that we can make someone's life a little bit easier and make a place a lot safer. And I think, the power of technology to vastly improve a process like that without, like you said, the technology is there, the AI is there. It's a matter of saying, yes, we want to deploy that. We want to use it. We understand the value. And it's also about the real-time nature of it. So that's a lot of what, when I think about what Force Metric does, being there in the moment with the data that matters is what makes a difference.
Well, and you said it best, that we're asking them to do an impossible task. And to a point that you mentioned earlier, be right all the time. And we talk about law enforcement as sort of being 90% administrative boredom and 10% sheer terror. That's essentially what law enforcement tends to be, is like, oh my God, I am going out to shots fired, right? Versus sort of, I was doing paperwork. And so, when I started Force Metrics, really, I was kind of frustrated after my academy classmate, Dan Alphin, was shot and killed in a routine search warrant. There were 2 FBI agents that were killed in Miami. And, I was devastated to know that we later did identify that there was information this person wanted to kind of go out in a blaze of glory and kill law enforcement, but it was in a paragraph of a report of a bunch of reports that was never going to see the light of day. And that's because we have too much data. And the data requires reading and processing and rereading again. And we don't have time, so we're looking for the good stuff. And is the good stuff the right stuff? And so I said, with my experience as a technologist, as someone who's been in law enforcement, who's used force myself, but also have been pulled over well over 30 times, handcuffed 3 times, handcuffed and sat on a curb as a juvenile with no criminal record, Ivy Leaguer, Goldman Sachs or FBI agent. I was saying, no one's talking about data as like the solutioning for the 2020 issues that sort of stems. Everyone's talking about staffing and training, and we don't have enough staff, and because of that, we don't have enough time to train. But we have all this data, and so that's what I would say. Okay, let me kind of dig into this a little bit more, and that's where I end up striking up a conversation with the lead developer of the Chicago Cubs, and I learned a lot about how he takes lots of data from ball velocity, swing plate, high speed cameras on the mound, and distills it down for a player, coach, and scout to use it to look at a kid's swing in the Dominican Republic with overlay. And I'm like, I wonder if we could do something with public safety. And I got him to quit the Cubs. He brought a couple engineers over from the Cubs, and then I put engineers in cop cars around the country, and I said, go pull people over. Actually sit in the dispatch center and listen to 911 calls. Actually go to a domestic violence call. And what we realized was there is a lot of data. It's just very hard to get to. It's multiple systems. Imagine, I like to say, we take in 5 to 10 different forget password style systems that you'd have to say, oh, I don't remember my password. Oh, screw it, I'll just figure it out. And we essentially created, baseball cards, baseball engineers, baseball cards, where we could say, we want to identify safety needs from a personal location or situation in seconds and on their smartphone. So, think about this for a second. If I'm an officer and I'm interacting with you, the first thing I'm thinking about is, are you going to kill me? The second thing I'm thinking about is, are you going to kill someone else? The third thing I'm thinking about is, are you going to kill yourself? Those are the first 3 things I'm thinking about. And then next is, why am I here? What are your social needs, your social truths? And this goes back to autism, dementia, PTSD from the military, a domestic violence victim for years, in and out of homeless shelters. And I'm trying to figure this out again in seconds, if not maybe a couple minutes. And also maybe not try to re-traumatize you or trigger you and a variety of stuff like that. And so we decided that, okay, if this data is collected somewhere else, someone else has interacted with you, someone else took the time to hear your story, your social truth, let's put it in a way so that the next person interacts with you has a bit more information. So I don't re-traumatize you. I don't make you retell me your assault story. I also go in maybe with the right resources. Maybe I'm bringing in the mental health co-responder or the crisis response team, because I already know going in that this is the initial problem. I may be here because of shoplifting, but it's also that there's a mental health need, or even worse, you're a domestic violence victim and your partner took your money and you need formula. And so when you start to think about that and you've traumatized with handcuffs and the kid and the baby's in the hands, and when really that's the issue and that's the underlying issue and we could solve for that through other ways, you now become proactively helping a problem. And so that's what we do. We essentially sit on top of all these public safety systems. We distill, a very identifiable story on a personal location, and we do it in a way that makes everyone's social truths be as respectful as possible.
Yeah, I love that. And it's such an incredible story. The baseball story is just fantastic. I mean, there are so many sort of analogies right before our eyes. And, kudos to you for, kind of goes back to that quote that I have of seeing what everyone has seen and thinking what no one has thought. And it really sounds like that is truly the story of kind of how your story has come to be in Force Metrics. And I'm just really thrilled that I had the opportunity to talk to you today. And if there's anything else you'd like to leave the audience with before we go today, but I think the story is a story of optimism of what's possible. And we need to have more conversations like these because I think that brings hope and also awareness to what's possible. So thank you so much for being here today. And again, would love to leave the last words to you.
No, thank you very much. And, I enjoy having these conversations because I've got to do a lot and see a lot in a short time on Earth. And I love the human experience and having these conversations. And, I hope that as we start to explore more technologies, we're allowing not only the traditional community members that do come to the council meetings and probably have very, right concerns about some of this stuff, but also going to the community members that may never have decided to go to a community meeting or a council meeting and say, let me explain to you what we're trying to do. Let me see if you understand what that means. And let me get your opinion on if you think we're going in the right direction. Because oftentimes, I always look at my mother. She would be able to immediately tell me if something is trending in the right direction or the wrong direction. Every community has someone like that. And so it's important to take not only my technology like Force Metrics or your technology, others, to those members and say like, hey, this is what we're trying to do to make your neighborhood safe, to make your experience, positive, and for you to know that someone is on the other end actively looking to support you.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure, and we look forward to more conversations with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.